The storm had rolled in without warning, thick clouds swallowing the moonlight, thunder growling like some angry god overhead. In the flicker of a lantern's glow, Elena sat on the edge of the bed, her newborn pressed tightly to her chest. The infant's cries pierced through the storm, fragile and insistent, a sound that only deepened the silence where her husband's voice should have been. His body lay still, a lifeless shadow on the cot across the room, his face pale and drained of all the warmth she had once leaned on. Her throat burned with grief, but no tears came. The world had shifted too suddenly, too cruelly. Just hours ago, she had believed she would not face tomorrow alone. Just hours ago, she had imagined her husband's hands guiding her through the hardship of raising a child, his laughter softening the weight of their meager life. Now all of that was gone, stolen by an accident so mundane and brutal it felt almost senseless. A fall in the dark, a horse's startled kick, the sharp snap of bone, and silence. Elena's arms tightened around her son, his tiny breaths damp against her collarbone. "I've got you," she whispered, her voice trembling as she tried to convince herself of the words. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the shutters. It sounded like the voice of the earth itself, reminding her how small and fragile she was, how swiftly the world could swallow her whole. By morning, the knock on the door came. It was not gentle. Heavy fists rattled the wood until Elena's heart lurched in her chest. She opened the door slowly, clutching the baby, and was met by her husband's family. Faces grim, eyes sharp. There was no embrace, no sympathy in their gaze, only a businesslike cruelty that cut deeper than any words could. "We'll take what's ours," his eldest brother declared, stepping past her without invitation. His boots thudded across the wooden floor, each step erasing a piece of her life. They gathered tools, blankets, even the rocking chair her husband had carved with his own hands. Elena's protests broke on deaf ears. "You've no right," she pleaded, her voice hoarse. "No right?" The brother's wife spat the words, her lips curled in disdain. "You're nothing now. Just a widow with a mouth to feed. This house, this land, it belongs to us." The final cruelty came with the slam of the door behind them. Elena stood on the porch in the downpour, her hair plastered to her cheeks, the baby's thin cries muffled against her shoulder. Her knees buckled, but she refused to fall. She would not give them the satisfaction. She walked. Mile after mile of muddy roads stretched ahead, the child's weight a burning anchor in her arms. Each step felt like walking into a void, no destination, no promise of shelter. She passed by fields where horses grazed in the distance, their dark shapes blurred by rain. They were free, untethered, their breath rising in clouds of strength. For a moment she envied them. The town offered no refuge. At the general store, people whispered behind their hands as she passed, their pity sharp as daggers. She caught fragments, "Poor thing, can't last long." A baby too, but no one stepped forward. No one offered bread or a roof, or even a kind word. By the second night, Elena's legs threatened to give way. The baby whimpered weakly, his tiny body hungry, restless, and she feared her own milk was drying with her strength. Her vision blurred as she stumbled down a narrow path leading into the lowlands. She did not know where she was headed, only that she had to keep moving. To stop was to surrender. At last, when her body could take no more, she collapsed against a fence post, her cheeks scraping the rough wood. Her breath came ragged, the baby's small fists twitching as he whimpered against her chest. She whispered apologies into the storm. The sound of hooves cut through the night. At first, she thought it was a dream, a cruel trick of her exhausted mind. But then she saw him, an older man astride a horse, lantern swinging from his saddle. He slowed as he drew near, eyes narrowing as they landed on her. His face was carved with lines of weather and time, his expression guarded, but not indifferent. "You'll freeze out here," he said, his voice low and steady. Elena tried to answer, but her throat betrayed her. The words tangled with a sob she had held back for 2 days. The man dismounted, his boots sinking into the mud. He studied her, the child, the bruised exhaustion written into her posture. Something in his gaze shifted, just slightly, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps pity. He extended a roughened hand.
"Come on," he said.
"You can stay for the night, but that's all." The promise was narrow, begrudging. Yet to Elena it was salvation. She nodded, too weary to speak, and let him lift her to her feet. With her son still in her arms, she followed him into the darkness, the storm rolling overhead, unaware that she had just stepped into the beginning of something larger than her grief, something that would demand more of her than she had ever imagined. Morning light streamed through the cracks of the wooden walls, casting golden lines across the small room where Elena stirred awake. For a moment, disoriented, she thought she had dreamed it all. The storm, the betrayal, the stranger on horseback. But then the cry of her son broke the silence, and the ache in her body returned like a dull drumbeat. She turned her head and saw the man from the night before. He stood in the doorway, broad-shouldered, his frame weathered by years of work. He carried no expression beyond what seemed like quiet calculation, as though he were still deciding whether he regretted bringing her here at all. "You should eat," he said simply, setting down a plate on the table. "Bread, beans, a jar of milk." His eyes flicked to the child in her arms, then back to her, unreadable. Elena whispered her thanks, though he did not seem to expect it. She sat at the table, balancing the baby while eating in small, careful bites, aware of his presence. He moved with deliberate precision, checking his boots, gathering his hat, as though he could not stand still for long. Before stepping out, he paused. "Don't go wandering," he warned. "The land's wide, and it won't be kind to you." The door closed behind him, leaving her in silence once more. She spent the day exploring cautiously, her body still heavy with fatigue. The ranch was sprawling, fields stretching to the horizon, fences that seemed to go on forever, barns worn with age but sturdy. Horses moved in the pastures, their manes catching the wind. One, in particular, drew her eye, a tall gray mare with restless eyes and an untamed gait. The animal paced near the far fence, muscles taut, as though it carried a storm within its skin. Elena stood transfixed, feeling an unexpected kinship in the horse's agitation. Later, when the man returned, she ventured a question. "What's her name?" He glanced at the mare.
"Sierra."
"She doesn't take to anyone." "Not yet." The way he said it felt weighted, as if the horse's mistrust was a challenge not only to her, but to himself. Elena held the child closer and looked back at Sierra, who tossed her head as though rejecting the world itself. Days blurred together. The man, she learned his name was Cole, spoke little, but his silence was never cruel. He was a man of work, each hour claimed by tasks that seemed endless. Elena, sensing the unspoken rules of his home, began to help where she could. At first, she fumbled, feeding chickens while balancing the baby, spilling water at the pump, her hands untrained for ranch work. Cole said nothing, though she caught his watchful eyes more than once, measuring her effort, waiting to see if she would give up. She did not. Each night, she collapsed into bed, her muscles aching, her arms weary from carrying both child and labor. And yet, something stirred in her. Each sunrise felt like a battle won, proof that she had not broken. Cole's silence began to soften in small ways. He left tools where she could reach them, showed her with a nod how to stack the hay bales properly, even offered a blanket for the baby's crib without a word. His kindness was never spoken, but it was there, folded into his gestures like threads of a cloth he didn't want noticed. Sometimes, though, the silence between them carried ghosts. Elena would glance at him across the table, the lantern light carving shadows into his face, and she would wonder what loss had carved him hollow. She wanted to ask, but the weight in his eyes warned her not to. At night, when the baby finally slept, memories of her husband pressed in. She saw him in flashes, his laugh while saddling a horse, the way he spoke of the land he dreamed of owning, the gentle way he placed his hand on her swelling belly months before their son's birth. She whispered promises into the dark, that she would keep his dream alive, that their child would not grow rootless. Yet doubt gnawed at her. She had nothing but her will. Could that ever be enough? It was Sierra who offered her the first spark of belonging. One morning, Elena approached the fence, her son swaddled close against her chest. The mare watched her warily, ears pinned back. Elena extended a hand slowly, whispering soothing words, though she doubted the horse understood. For long minutes, nothing changed. Then, to her surprise, Sierra stepped closer, nostrils flaring, until her breath warmed Elena's palm. The moment was fleeting. The mare jerked back almost instantly, but it sent a shiver through her veins. When Cole noticed, his eyes lingered on her longer than usual. He said nothing, but in the quiet, she felt his acknowledgement. Still, the outside world pressed in. On a trip into town with Cole, Elena heard them again, the whispers. Women huddled near the store entrance, voices lowered but sharp enough to cut. Living off another man's mercy, one said. And with a babe, too. Another laughed under her breath. Elena's cheeks burned, shame flooding her, but she forced herself to walk past, chin raised. That night, as she lay awake, she decided she could not let their judgment break her. If she was to stay, she would earn her place. She would prove, to herself as much as to anyone else, that she was not a burden but a force capable of surviving. The decision came to a head the next morning. Cole was preparing to ride out, saddling his horse with the same quiet rhythm as always, when Elena stepped forward. "I want to help," she said, her voice steady. "You already do," he replied without looking at her. "No," she pressed, standing straighter. "I want to work. Proper work. If I'm staying here, I'll carry my weight. I don't want your charity." His hands stilled on the leather straps. For a moment, he said nothing, then turned his eyes on her, sharp and assessing. The silence stretched, heavy as iron. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "All right. But if you're staying, you work for it. No halfway." The words were not harsh, but they were firm, like a gate closing behind her, leaving no path but forward. Elena met his gaze and nodded once. "Then I'll work." Cole mounted his horse, and with a flick of the reins, he was gone. Elena stood at the edge of the yard, the baby cradled in her arms, the echo of his words burning in her chest. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt something stir beyond grief, resolve, unshakable and alive. The days that followed tested Elena in ways she had never known before. From dawn until the sky dimmed again, she worked alongside Cole, no longer just a quiet guest in his home but a laborer in her own right. The first weeks were brutal. Her hands blistered from mending fences, her back screamed from lifting bales, and her arms shook with exhaustion by nightfall. The baby's cries often interrupted what little rest she could steal, and there were mornings she could barely pull herself from the bed. Yet she did. Every single day, she rose and faced the work, her determination stitched into every aching step. Cole watched her with a stoic patience that sometimes bordered on severity. He never praised her, never softened the edge of his instructions. When she fumbled with the tack, he corrected her bluntly. When she misjudged the heft of a post, he made her do it again. To an outsider, it might have seemed unkind, but Elena began to understand the truth. He was treating her not as a fragile widow, but as someone capable of more than she believed. He demanded her best, and in that demand, he gave her dignity. The hardest challenge came with Sierra. The mare was wild, unbroken, with a fire in her eyes that dared anyone to try and tame her. Cole had warned her not to get too close, that Sierra was a beast that trusted no hand. But Elena felt something deeper each time she looked at the horse, as though the mare's restless spirit was bound to her own grief. Both had been wounded, both fought the world with a kind of reckless fury. Each morning, after her chores, Elena spent a little time by Sierra's pen. At first, the mare kept her distance, snorting and pacing like a prisoner. But Elena persisted, speaking in low tones, offering pieces of apple or sugar from her palm. Days stretched into weeks, and slowly, the horse began to edge nearer, the distrust in her eyes softening into curiosity. The first time Sierra allowed Elena's fingers to brush her muzzle, a shiver of triumph ran through her. It was as though a wall had cracked open, just enough to glimpse the possibility of trust. Cole noticed. He didn't say anything immediately, but one evening, as they both sat by the fire, he broke his silence. "You've got her ear," he muttered. "That's no small thing." Elena looked up from rocking her child. "She's just like me," she said quietly. "She doesn't trust because she's been hurt." Cole studied her for a long moment, the firelight dancing in his eyes. Something passed between them then, something unspoken but heavy with meaning. For the first time, she saw not just the rancher who had taken her in, but the man beneath, the man who carried his own scars. Their uneasy partnership began to shift. Cole started teaching her more directly. How to hold the reins, how to read a horse's body, how to move with confidence even when fear gnawed inside. His lessons were strict, and their tempers often clashed. Once, after a particularly grueling day, Elena snapped at him, her voice raw. "You don't have to treat me like I'll break. I've already broken and picked myself back up again." Cole's reply was sharp but carried a crack of truth. "Then prove it. Out here, no one hands you mercy. Not even the land." The words stung, but they also fueled her. Each day, she returned to the work with renewed resolve, her hands steadying, her body growing stronger. In Sierra's eyes, she saw her progress reflected. The mare's trust deepened, her resistance melting little by little until Elena could slip a halter over her and lead her without a fight. It was in those quiet victories that Elena began to believe she could carve a future for herself and her son, one not built on pity, but on strength. Yet life had a way of testing resolve when it was most fragile. The ranch itself was suffering. Rain had been scarce that season, the fields parched and brittle. Cole spoke little of it, but Elena overheard conversations with men in town, whispers of debt, and the possibility of selling off stock to keep the ranch afloat. The weight of his burden settled like a shadow over the house. He grew more withdrawn, his silences stretching longer, the lines on his face etched deeper by worry. One night, after she had put the baby to sleep, Elena found him sitting alone on the porch, staring at the horizon where the last light had died. She sat beside him, uncertain if he would send her away, but he didn't move. For a long time, they sat in silence until finally he spoke. "My wife and boy," he said softly, his voice rough. "They died 10 years ago. Fever took them both in a week. Buried them under that oak yonder." He pointed to a lone tree in the distance, its branches stretched like arms against the night sky. Elena's chest tightened. She hadn't expected him to bear the wound he had guarded so fiercely. His silence had always hinted at loss, but hearing it was different. It made sense of his solitude, his sternness, his reluctance to let anyone close. "I lost him too," she whispered. "Not to fever, but in a way that still feels unreal. Sometimes I wake and think he'll walk through the door. And then I remember." Cole turned to her, his eyes meeting hers with a rawness she had not seen before. "That's why I didn't want you here. I thought it'd be too much, seeing you fight through the same storm I drowned in. But you're different. You keep standing." The admission settled between them like a fragile truce, a moment of honesty that tethered them together. But the reprieve was short-lived. The drought worsened, and with it came the possibility of ruin. Cole considered selling Sierra and the other horses, his jaw tight with defeat. Elena, however, saw something different. She saw in Sierra not just a horse, but a chance, a spark of survival. "What if we trained her?" she suggested one evening, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Sierra's strong. She could compete. Maybe not here, but in the events that draw crowds. People pay to see a horse like her. We could bring money in, enough to keep the ranch alive." Cole's laugh was short, bitter. "You don't just walk into something like that. Takes years. And money we don't have." "Then we try," she pressed. "You said it yourself. No one hands you mercy. We fight for it. Sierra can do this. I can do this." He studied her, skepticism etched deep into his features, but beneath it was something else, a glimmer of the fire he once carried before loss hollowed him out. He didn't agree, not then, but he didn't dismiss her either. The decision seemed almost made for them when, a few days later, Sierra showed her true potential. Elena, guiding her in the pen, managed to ride her for the first time. The mare bucked and reared, but Elena clung on, her determination unshaken. By the time Sierra still beneath her, sides heaving, Cole was leaning against the fence, a rare smile breaking across his face. "You've got grit," he admitted. "Maybe more than sense. But maybe that's what it'll take." The moment felt like a turning point, as if the ranch itself had taken a breath after holding it for too long. But just as hope began to rise, the past came crashing back. One afternoon, a wagon pulled into the yard, its wheels grinding against the dirt. Elena froze as she recognized the faces, her husband's family, the same who had cast her out into the storm. They stepped down with arrogance written into every movement, their eyes sweeping over the land with greedy intent. "We've come for the boy," the brother declared coldly. "You've no means to raise him." The yard was tense with silence, broken only by the uneasy shifting of Sierra in her pen and the faint creak of the wagon wheels as they settled into the dirt. Elena's husband's family stood firm, their eyes sharp with judgment, their postures brimming with entitlement. The eldest brother stepped forward, his boots grinding into the earth as if the ground itself belonged to him. "You can't keep him, Elena," he said flatly. "You've got no land, no name worth standing on. What kind of life is that for a child? Hand him over, and we'll see he's raised proper." Her arms tightened around the baby instinctively, as if her very body were a fortress against them. Rage coursed through her veins, hot and unyielding. "He's mine," she said, her voice low, steady, and carved with a strength she hadn't realized she carried. "You threw us out into the storm. You left us to die. You've no right to him." The brother sneered, his mouth curling into a cold half-smile. "What's right is what the law decides. And you'll find the law don't look kindly on beggars squatting on land that isn't theirs." Cole stepped forward then, his presence commanding, his silence carrying more weight than any threat. He placed himself between Elena and the intruders, his eyes narrowing under the brim of his hat. "She's not squatting," he said quietly, though the words rolled like thunder. "She's working. She's earning her keep here. And you'll not lay a hand on her boy while I draw breath." The family shifted uneasily. The brother's confidence wavered, though he tried to mask it with a scoff. "You think you can stand against blood? That boy ain't yours, and neither is she." Cole didn't flinch.
"No."
"But she's under my roof, and that makes her mine to protect." The word struck Elena like a brand. Not because she belonged to anyone, but because in his voice was something she had not heard in so long, a promise. The standoff simmered until the brother finally spat at the dirt, muttering curses as he turned back toward the wagon. "This ain't over," he warned. "We'll be back, and with papers to prove our claim." Elena's heart pounded as she watched them leave, the dust of their retreat curling into the air. She held her son close, her body trembling with the release of tension she hadn't allowed herself to show. When the last echo of the wagon wheels faded, she turned to Cole. "They'll come again," she whispered. "They will," he agreed, his expression grim. "Which means we don't just wait. We show them you're not the helpless woman they think you are. We give this town reason to stand with you, not against you." His gaze drifted to Sierra, restless and fiery in her pen. Elena followed his eyes, and in that moment, she understood. The mare was more than an animal. She was the symbol of her fight, the living proof that Elena could take something wild, broken, and doubted, and make it strong again. The days that followed became a crucible. Cole trained her harder than ever, not just in handling Sierra but in riding her, pushing both woman and horse to the brink of exhaustion. Elena fell more than once, her body bruised and aching, but she refused to stay down. Each time she hit the dirt, she rose again, her determination burning brighter. Cole's strictness no longer stung, it fueled her. He demanded she find her limits, and she demanded of herself that she surpass them. Word spread through town of what she was attempting. Some scoffed, saying a widow had no place on a horse like Sierra. Others watched with quiet curiosity, wondering if she might succeed where even seasoned riders had failed. Whispers turned into wagers, and soon the upcoming rodeo became the stage for more than sport. It became the battleground for Elena's future. The day of the event dawned with a sky clear and sharp, the sun blazing down as though the heavens themselves demanded proof of her mettle. The arena was crowded, voices buzzing, the smell of dust and sweat thick in the air. Elena stood at the gate, her son cradled in a friend's arms, and laid her hand on Sierra's flank. The mare shifted beneath her touch, powerful and restless, but no longer distrustful. Their bond was no longer tentative, it was forged. Cole adjusted the saddle straps one last time, his movements precise, his silence heavy. When he finally met her eyes, there was no hardness there, only steady resolve. "Ride like it's your life," he said softly. "Because in many ways it is." Elena mounted, her hands steady on the reins, her breath measured. The gate swung open, and Sierra surged forward like a storm unleashed. The crowd roared, but the sound faded into nothing. All that existed was the rhythm of the horse beneath her, the raw surge of power, the battle between control and freedom. Sierra bucked, twisted, fought against her weight, but Elena clung with every fiber of her being. Each second stretched into eternity, each movement a test of her strength, her will, her right to claim her place in this world. The dust rose around them, blinding, choking, but still she rode, refusing to fall. When Sierra finally stilled, her chest heaving, her head tossing in reluctant surrender, the arena erupted in cheers. Elena sat tall in the saddle, her chest rising with pride, her eyes blazing with triumph. For the first time, the town saw not a widow, not a beggar, but a fighter. Her husband's family was there, their faces pale with shock, their confidence shattered. Whatever claim they thought they had was drowned beneath the roar of the crowd. They had no power here anymore, not against the proof of her strength, not against the unity of the community that now stood behind her. Later, when the dust settled and the crowd dispersed, Cole approached her quietly, a rare softness in his eyes. He held out a folded deed, worn at the edges, the ink faded but still legible. "This land," he said, his voice low, "is yours now. Not because I pity you, because you've earned it every inch. Your husband dreamed of it for you. I'm making sure you have it." Elena's throat closed with emotion, tears slipping free despite her effort to hold them back. She took the deed with trembling hands, her son nestled against her chest, the weight of a future suddenly real in her arms. The setting sun bathed the fields in gold as she stood at the edge of her new land, Sierra grazing nearby, the baby cooing softly against her. Cole stood beside her, not as a savior but as a partner, silent and steadfast. For the first time since loss had ripped her life apart, she felt whole again. She whispered to her child, her voice steady, her heart unburdened. "We're home now." And as Sierra galloped freely across the open pasture, mane streaming like a banner in the wind, Elena knew the truth of it. From the ashes of her grief, she had forged not just survival, but a life of strength, dignity, and unbreakable hope. The air that evening was softer than the stormy days behind them, though the weight of what had passed still lingered like smoke after a fire. Elena stood on the porch of the modest house now legally hers, watching her son sleep in his cradle through the window. The deed lay folded in her pocket, yet she touched it often, needing the reassurance that it was real, that her future was no longer hanging by the thin thread of someone else's mercy. Sierra grazed nearby, her coat glistening in the twilight, a creature once untamable, now bound by trust. Though victory had been claimed, Elena knew it was not the end. Her husband's family had retreated, but men like that did not forget wounds to their pride. They would circle back, whether through law or vengeance, and she could not allow herself to grow complacent. Survival had taught her this. Peace was never permanent, only earned day by day. Cole approached from the barn, his stride steady, his hat low against the fading light. He carried himself with the quiet certainty of a man accustomed to burden, but there was something new in his presence tonight. Less guard, more openness, as if her triumph had carved away some of his distance. He set a hand on the railing beside her, close enough for her to feel the warmth of him without him reaching for more than she was ready to give. "You rode like fire today," he said, his voice low, edged with the faintest smile. "I rode because I had to," Elena answered, though her heart swelled at the words. "Not for pride. For him." She glanced toward the window where her son slept. "That's what makes it matter," Cole replied. His gaze shifted toward Sierra, then back to Elena. "But don't fool yourself into thinking it's finished. Men who lose face the way they did, they'll look for another way to strike. You'll need to be ready." "I know," she admitted, though the admission did not weaken her. "But this time I'm not afraid." Cole studied her for a long moment, as though searching her face for any crack in her resolve. Finding none, he gave a slight nod. "Then you're stronger than most I've ever known." The silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable, filled with all the words they hadn't yet dared to speak. Elena thought of the road that had brought her here, storm, hunger, humiliation, despair, and how each hardship had become fuel for something unbreakable inside her. She had not chosen this life, but she had shaped it into something worth keeping. As the night deepened, lanterns flickered to life across the yard. A knock sounded at the gate, sharp and unexpected. Both Elena and Cole turned, their bodies tensing as one. A rider had arrived, his silhouette etched against the dusk. He dismounted slowly, hands lifted in a show of peace. It was the town sheriff. "Elena," he called, his tone measured.
Cole.
"I thought it best you hear it from me. Your husband's kin have filed papers in the county seat. They're pressing for custody of the child and laying claim to your land on grounds of inheritance." The words landed like stones, heavy but not entirely surprising. Elena's hand tightened around the rail. She had been waiting for the other strike, and now it had come. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice calm though her pulse raced. "There'll be a hearing in 2 weeks," the sheriff replied. "It won't be decided in a rodeo arena this time. You'll need proof, witnesses, contracts, every ounce of truth you can muster. They're playing this the way rich men always do, by the letter of the law." Cole's jaw clenched, his hand brushing against his holster before falling away. "And what's the law worth if it bows to men like them?" The sheriff's expression was unreadable. "That's for you to find out. But you've made allies today, Elena. Folks saw what you did. That carries weight. Don't waste it." When the sheriff rode away, the silence returned heavier than before. Elena's victory suddenly felt fragile, as though one strong wind could scatter it like ash. But she steadied herself. If they wanted her in court, she would face them there as she had faced them in the dust and the storm, unyielding, with her head held high. Cole broke the silence at last. 2 weeks, he said. "That's not much time, but enough to gather what we need. I'll stand with you. You won't fight this alone." Elena turned to him fully then, her eyes steady, her fear tempered into resolve. "I never thought I'd find another man I could trust," she said quietly. "But I trust you." It was the closest she had come to admitting the bond that had grown between them, and Cole seemed to understand. He tipped his hat slightly, not pressing her for more. "Then that's enough for now." She looked out across her land, the moon rising silver over the pasture where Sierra lifted her head, ears pricked, as if she too sensed the coming storm. The fight was not finished. Perhaps it never would be. But for the first time, Elena did not dread the battle ahead. She welcomed it, because now she knew who she was. Because now she was no longer alone. And as the night settled over the ranch, Elena stood tall on the porch with her child safe inside, Cole beside her, and the weight of her destiny finally in her own hands. The war was only beginning, but her spirit no longer trembled. It blazed.